Okay, here we go. This meeting is being recorded. So today we have Kate Clemmer with us today. She is a licensed clinical social worker and clinical outreach coordinator at Eating Recovery Center and Moonlight Mood and Anxiety Center in Towson, Maryland. She earned her Master's of Social Work from the University of Maryland, Baltimore in 2005 with a specialization in child and adolescent and family health. Kate began her career providing school-based mental health services to students and families in Baltimore City Public Schools and has spent the last 13 years in the field of eating disorder prevention and treatment, during which she helped coordinate the statewide Love Your Tree campaign. Kate is passionate about the topics of body image and media literacy and facilitates one of the nation's longest running free weekly support groups for people with eating disorders. So Kate, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks. I'm excited to be here. We have, I put a lot in here, so I don't know if we'll get to all of it. And I apologize if I go fast, but I had a lot of ideas and things to share. That said, this is going to be a jumping off point, and so we won't get to all the answers today, and I'm hopeful that it will at least start a good conversation. So let's get right to it. So what I always like to start with, whether I'm presenting to educators or parents or students, is an overview of what body image is, because I think that that word or that phrase comes up a lot, and a lot of people have a misconception about what body image actually is and how it impacts all of us. So first and foremost, the definition of body image includes 4 components. Body image is first the perceptual aspect of things, so how we see ourselves, how we perceive our bodies and our appearance when we look in the mirror, when we close our eyes, when we just look down at ourselves if we're driving in the car. It also includes the way we think other people perceive us, or those kind of ideas about what we think other people, how we think other people see us. Secondly, it's the way we feel about our bodies. So this is an emotional component. So you can think of any number of emotions somebody might have about their body. Somebody sitting in your classroom might feel really self-conscious about their body. They may feel very proud of their body after they just scored the winning goal in the lacrosse game. So those are types of emotions or feelings. And as you see, they can kind of exist on a continuum from negative to positive and anywhere in between neutrally. The third component is the cognition part of things. So the thoughts and beliefs we have about our bodies. This might be somebody walking through the hallway at school, believing that everybody's staring at them because they have a huge zit on their face. Like, I just truly believe this, and I know that it's true. The thought could be, you know, I am too short to go out for the volleyball team. Only tall people can go out for the volleyball team. These kind of thoughts and beliefs that stir all day long, we all have them. And again, they can impact us in different ways. So the first 3, the perceptual, the emotional, the cognitive, all kind of combine together to impact the behavioral aspect of body image, that 4th component. So the things we do or do not do because of the way we see, feel, and think about our bodies. So I'm sure you can imagine how this impacts people at various stages of life, but here's a couple examples of what this might look like for adolescents. Research shows that 31% of teens say that they actually withdraw from classroom debate and discussion because of body anxiety. So on days when their dissatisfaction with their appearance or obsession with how they look is really at a high, they may not raise their hand or contribute to discussion. And you can imagine why that might be. So if I'm already feeling negative about how I look, I don't want to raise my hand and have everybody turn and look at me. Or maybe I am so distracted by my thoughts about my appearance or my body or what I need to change that I, am not even following along with what that teacher is saying or what the other kids in class are doing. So it could be distraction as well. Body dissatisfaction among girls in this study, 15 to 17-year-olds, actually led to them saying they actually just won't give an opinion on something. And 16% on days where body dissatisfaction is really high, they actually have avoided school altogether. So whether that means, just staying home, skipping a class, avoiding another aspect of school because that preoccupation with their appearance or weight is so high. We know in general that students and kids with low body confidence, these are all kind of different words and different phrases for the same thing. So it could be low body confidence, negative body image, body dissatisfaction. All of those typically refer to the same thing. And we know that students who endorse low body confidence actually are more likely to engage in things like substance abuse, risky sexual behavior, smoking, disordered eating, and a number of other harmful behaviors. So it is associated with negative and unhealthy behaviors. We also know that kids with low body confidence or body dissatisfaction are less likely to participate in sports, which is an unfortunate cycle because sports can be a protective factor for students. We know that typically, provided that the coach and team atmosphere is one that's positive, participating in sports can actually have a positive effect on our body image and sense of self. So unfortunately, that cycle of not participating in something that could help can make it worse or help cause kids to miss out on positive associations with their body. We know that overall self-esteem, so the value and worth we feel we bring to the world, is heavily impacted by body image as well. So this is, one of the misconceptions is that how we look or how we feel about how we look is sort of a vain or vanity aspect. And actually it is pretty intertwined with, more important overall sense of self and sense of self-worth. So that's why we're here today, and that's why hopefully lots of you showed up. As many as 6 out of 10 people of a variety of ages, this is obviously not something that just impacts kids, but they say that they stop doing activities they enjoy because they don't like how they look or they feel badly about their appearance. And so hopefully that visual kind of gets to the heart of this matter, in that helping kids and students and ourselves, quite frankly, find comfort and satisfaction in our bodies as they are, can actually help improve self-esteem and keep us connected and engaged in school and the world around us in positive and joyful ways. Speaking of ages, as I mentioned, this is kind of a lifelong thing. We know that girls and subsequently, since I made this graphic, I have seen many studies that also share that boys have a similar trajectory, but girls as young as 3 years old were already invested in what we call the thin ideal, which hopefully you can, understand is this ideal that's promoted by our culture that all things healthy and good and beautiful are wrapped up in having a thin body, that kind of expectation that we should all be one size or shape. And so it starts really early. So I don't know what age everybody is interacting with on a daily basis here, but this is not something that would exclude you if you're at the preschool or elementary level, for sure. So a key takeaway that I like to review is that the goal is not to help our students change their bodies so that they fit into that ideal, or to help them change their bodies until they feel comfortable or until they're satisfied with how they look. The goal is to help them love themselves and feel comfortable in the bodies that they have, and to want to take care of those bodies because all bodies are good bodies, essentially. And that's another piece that I think often gets misplaced in this conversation, and a lot of individuals struggle with. They think, if I could just change my body, if I could just lose X amount of pounds, or, get these wrinkles off my face, or whatever it might be for any of us at different stages of life, then I would feel okay, or then I would like how I looked and I would feel better. And we see over and over again that that's not the case. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons why and what we can actually do to help our kids and students feel good. I love this quote by Dr. Rowell. She wrote this book, which is a wonderful resource as well. Helping a child have a healthy relationship with food and his or her body is at the core of health and happiness. It is preventive medicine at its most powerful. So one of the other concepts that's important to understand there, as we are working on helping our students have peaceful relationships with food and their bodies, we need to understand some of the things that can disrupt that or get in the way of that. And a big one is weight stigma. And again, there's multiple terms for this. You might see weight stigma, weight bias, fat phobia, all of these terms come up in the literature at different times. They essentially mean the same thing. Weight stigma is negative beliefs about kids and people with larger bodies that lead to discrimination against fat people. So active or internal or all sorts of discrimination, and sometimes to the level of harassment and assault. So it could be, as I mentioned, really severe harassment, bullying, assault. It's also just the negative thoughts, attitudes, and devaluation of people in higher weight bodies. The world is kind of made for thin people. And so this draws attention to all the ways in which, weight, similar to other marginalized communities, people in higher weight bodies face discrimination and barriers to good care and positive associations on a daily basis. So I'm sure you could all think about the stereotypes about people in larger bodies that we see, whether it's through commercials or the way people talk about them or the pictures. We're going to look at some pictures a little bit later that show some of these stereotypes, but essentially people, kids and adults in larger bodies are often assumed to be lazy or, lack a concern or care about health, sometimes considered to be stupid or less intelligent. And these are all stereotypes that are not based in reality, but that our culture has perpetuated in a number of ways. And again, this starts really early. I don't know if anybody has seen Zootopia, but there's a running joke about this character. He's one of the only larger characters and is just constantly seen eating donuts. In this scene, he actually finds a donut under one of his neck rolls, and it's, made to be a joke, and he's made fun of throughout for kind of his demeanor. Peppa Pig, which could be a wonderful representation of a family in larger bodies, actually ends up having a number of times where people are made fun of for being in bigger bodies, and they use some derogatory terms in that. And in the movie Trolls, there's a scene in which one of the characters actually gets a date and says the line, "I just have to lose 30 pounds in the next 8 hours." So as you can imagine, all of these types of things come up all the time. These are for younger kids, but this comes up even more significantly in movies and media for adolescents and adults all the time. This is a pretty good example of weight bias in a health campaign. This was a billboard that was put up in Georgia, I believe, kind of trying to, with the underlying intention, I believe, of helping kids be healthier. It was the Stop Childhood Obesity campaign. But as you can imagine, there was outrage because essentially it just kind of appeared to be mugshots of kids in larger bodies with a lack of understanding or lack of empathy, and did not go over well and did not accomplish any sort of improvements in health. So,
Kate, what was the date of this campaign? Was it recently?
This was a few years ago. This was probably 5 years ago. And there was actually a wonderful response campaign. I don't have a picture of that. Sometimes I do include it, but luckily there was outrage. But this stuff happens all the time. We see this, and this kind of even the term war on obesity, it's like people are declaring war against me and my body is what it can feel like for people. It can also look like things like this, where are you beach body ready? Or do you have a beach body? The underlying message being that, you don't deserve to go to the beach and have fun and jump in the waves unless you have a body that looks like this, right? And you're not ready, or you shouldn't expose yourself in this way unless you look like this. And in these cases, it's often driven by profit, obviously, selling a product that could, in a lot of cases, be potentially harmful for people, so that somebody makes money off of people, desiring a specific body.
Kate, if I may make a comment.
Yeah.
I've been at a spectrum of both ends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm considered to be a late bloomer. My father was 6'3", his dad was 6'6". I'm about 6'4" with a 6'7" arm span. When I was in high school, I graduated weighing 165. When I graduated college, I was 200 even. And my body kept growing throughout the years. I am in my late 50s. I'm wearing a 50 extra long in suits, 16, 17 in boots and shoes. And I'm working with elementary children, and what I've done is basically stated to children that there's some genetic factors to determine how you are. Some of you are a combination of two body types. You may be one body type. And I explained to them, I'm a combination of ectomorph and mesomorph. I've got the long arms, the big broad shoulders, 19-inch neck. And I let kids know that right now you're in a growing stage. So don't worry about what your friends say about you, because you can change what happens to your body in the years to come if you allow yourself to grow properly by eating properly and exercising, and not trying to play to what everybody sees as the status quo, because everybody's not designed to be a size 2.
Thank you. Yeah, you must have saw my presentation ahead of time. You hit on a couple points. Yeah.
I've lived your presentation.
Yeah. Yep. Well, chime in again, because I think we're going to touch on some more of what you shared specifically. But yeah, so I guess the point is, and Gregory, you may have experienced some of this too over the years, is like stigma and body shaming and things like this can look different in different ways. It's not always obvious. But a lot of times people who maybe are not as enlightened as our friend that just shared think that we really need to come down hard on kids and adults with larger bodies, or we really need to strive and give people something to motivate towards, or to work towards in terms of changing their body and getting healthier, that's really the only way. But it doesn't pan out in any of the research. And we know that kids that have lower body satisfaction and are made to feel less than or not good enough in the bodies that they are in, again, are more likely to engage in harmful behaviors and less likely to engage in physical activity and eat enough fruits and vegetables, right? So feeling bad about your body does not motivate you to take better care of it. And hopefully people are learning that now. And just really quickly, there's fascinating and tons of research coming out about kind of the connection or the disconnection between weight and health now. Unfortunately, we've been stuck on that for so long, but I won't go through all of these, but essentially the research is really finding that weight and health are not so intrinsically connected, and that fitness matters more than fatness, right? And so people can improve their health markers and feel better and improve their body image by, taking good care of themselves and engaging in fun behaviors and healthy behaviors. And even in the absence of weight loss, they experience all of those benefits, right? And so just a reminder that when we are encouraging people to move and find joyful movement, that if we hold weight loss as the marker or the goal for that, then when they do that and they don't lose weight, they feel like they've failed at exercise because they didn't get smaller. And then they oftentimes stop exercising, or they kind of take many breaks from a relationship with movement. And then they miss out on all the benefits they would have had. And so these are just a couple of examples, but there's a ton of studies that bear this out. So these will be linked in the slides. So the question often comes up, well, how do I motivate people to want to work out and engage in fitness without kind of dangling that carrot of weight loss in front of them? So I want you to think about those other campaigns that I showed first, and think about how that might have made people feel, or how it makes you feel to look at those, and what you would have done or what it made you want to do. And then I want you to watch this commercial and tell me if it makes you feel differently.
I'm the hottest round, and if you want me, y'all can stop me now. Is you with me now? Then biggie bounce. I know you dig the way I switch my style. Get your freak on, 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 get your freak on. People, here I come. Now sweat me when I'm done. Now people gather round. Now people jump around. Get your freak on, get your freak on.
I'm knackered.
So what we see there is a normalization of lots of different bodies, lots of different ages, normalizing rolls and jiggles and cellulite and all of that stuff, and to be able to have those different bodies and still look like you're having fun working out. And it's a lot of those things were very social, and not, there's no calorie count on the treadmill that people are watching and all of those things. And I just find that type of encouragement to be so much more energizing and so much more effective at people, being able to see themselves represented in these activities that we're wanting them to do because they're good for them. So kind of thinking about the discrepancy between what we typically see in fitness motivation and things like this. Oops, go. Next slide, there we go. So weight stigma shows up a lot of places, and I just wanted to provide a couple of examples just because what we are finding with the research is that weight stigma is more representative of negative health outcomes than actual BMI or weight categories, right? And oftentimes weight stigma shows up at the doctor's office. So 24% of doctors admitted that they were uncomfortable with having friends in larger bodies, and 18% of them even said they felt disgusted when treating a patient with high BMI. And as you can imagine, you're really unlikely to take good care of somebody if you're disgusted by them, right? And so we see that doctors tend to undertreat, overtreat, or misdiagnose patients in bigger bodies, and that they actually spend less time with them in practice. So, we often see studies that show people in bigger bodies have poorer health outcomes. And people are beginning to question, is that because of the fat, or is that because they're getting worse care? And there's a lot to this, but fat people are also more likely to avoid medical care when they know they'll be treated badly. So then they delay procedures, and they often become sicker or harder to treat by the time they get to the doctor. And so that is not, a result of the weight per se. It's a result of the weight stigma.
Kate, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your word choice? Like sometimes you use people with larger bodies, sometimes you use the word fat.
Mhm.
And can you just talk, I know there's a lot of different thoughts on that word. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, because that's somewhat intentional on my part.
Right.
Sometimes people still bristle at the word fat, and so I try to throw it in there every once in a while to normalize that word.
Mhm.
There's actually, within our field, there's more of a tendency to move away from words like obesity and overweight, as those tend to be more stigmatizing, and moving more towards people of size or people with large bodies, and definitely kind of this acceptance of fat and not bristling and not having that immediate reaction of that's like a four-letter word, like a bad word. So I do throw it in there, but I know it can still be, not everybody's there, so it can be jarring. So I try not to use it every time. Now, sometimes I do, if I'm quoting research, I just use whatever the research is based on. That's a good question.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Kate, if I may,
Yeah.
share another experience. When I was doing my student teaching at the high school in the last century, I had a situation where we had a senior defensive lineman. It was about 270 pounds. And he had never done a cartwheel before in all of his years. But for some reason, the previous teachers didn't let him know that there's two ways to do a cartwheel. There's a 360-degree cartwheel, which is a 4-touch, making complete circle. And then there's a 180-degree cartwheel, which means your legs come halfway around, just like you would in a martial arts kick.
Mm-hmm.
And when I showed him that, his confidence shot through the roof because he realized now he was capable of being successful without being compared to other people.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to give the students different ways to be successful as opposed to trying to do a cookie cutter method.
Yep. Yeah, and that goes for different types of athletic activities in fitness classes as well. Sometimes running is harder for people in larger bodies, and so swimming or different activities might be more fun for them, right?
I have a question, Kate. Are you
Yeah.
going to have questions at the end? I don't want to interrupt your presentation.
I was going to try. I don't know that we'll have time, but if you want to put them in the chat, I can, so you don't forget them, I can come back to them. Yeah.
Okay.
So just really quickly, we'll kind of speed through some of this so we get to the recommendations for educators here. Weight stigma is no stranger to schools either, and it can impact students' academic performance and attendance. And this probably sounds obvious, but the largest kids are at highest risk of being bullied, regardless of other factors such as gender, race, social skills, or academic achievement. We know that some of the impacts of weight stigma are, a host of mental health issues, unhealthy eating behaviors, and decreasing physical activity. And again, this is from the wording of the research, but worsening of obesity, but weight gain over time. So again, shaming people for their weight does not help them lose weight. In this study of teachers in New York, the teachers were actually given a chance to evaluate handwritten essays on health and fitness, and they were provided a picture of the author of the essay. And in one condition, it was the actual picture of this child that was, appeared to be a healthy weight by our culture standards. And then the other one was digitally altered to add 20 pounds. And after reading the essay, the teachers filled in a survey and did a grading assessment of the essay. And the teachers who saw the student in the higher weight body were more likely to recommend those students for tutoring or remedial help, judge the work as less neat. They were given the exact same essay. So they got lower grades overall, even though they were the same. And the teachers actually judged that the higher weight author worked harder than the other author picture. partly because of those stereotypes, probably, that we talked about before, like assuming that a fat child would be less likely to work or to have a positive outcome or to do a good job, and assuming they would have needed to work harder to do it. And so overall, the teachers gave the overweight students lower grades, and even though the quality of the essays was the same. So these weight biased attitudes, this is not to say that teachers are doing it all wrong. It's just kind of bringing it to your work and kind of thinking about it in your context. There's weight bias among social workers, among therapists, among parents. We all kind of grew up in this culture, so we're swimming in it. This is just to help us kind of understand our own weight biased attitudes and kind of begin to think about what we can do about them. So again, quickly, obviously mental health takes a toll when weight bias is present. And we know that stress, we know that chronic stress especially, can have a negative effect on all of these nutrition markers and physical health markers for us. So we know this is true for racial bias and other minority status, that people who deal with this stress on a daily basis have higher rates of some of these problems because of higher stress and cortisol levels. And the same is being found to be true for weight bias. And a lot of the same problems that we're finding are attributed to weight stigma, are usually often blamed on the weight itself. And so the more weight bias and discrimination people faced, the worse their reported physical health was. And so this all suggests that the stigma associated with weight is actually more harmful than the weight itself. I'm going to skip through this as it's just kind of reiterating that. But these are just some real life examples that you might see in a kid's daily life about how this impacts them. I've mentioned some of them already, but you might have Charlie, who's a little bit bigger than his friends. He's not going out to play in the neighborhood anymore because people have been teasing him. And that would have been when he gets all his exercise and movement in for the day. And then Kira has been told by her, parents and pediatrician that she needs to lose weight. So her parents have removed the snack foods from the house. So suddenly she's spending a lot of time at friends' houses, and during sleepovers, she may be going and raiding cabinets or kind of hoarding food to pack to bring home because she knows she's not going to get those things at home, right? So those are examples. So those are kind of some of the background concepts I wanted to make sure we covered. And now we're going to go into some guidelines, 10 things that you can kind of take into your classroom and just start to begin. As I mentioned, it's a starting off point. You can kind of start to evaluate where you're at, your own internal biases, and then the classroom setup and what's going on. Depending on what age and size class you have, all of these things can be adapted. So first, just reckoning with misinformation. We've touched on this a little bit. Obesity is similar to what Gregory was sharing. It's actually caused by complex genetic and environmental factors. So it's not just calories in and calories out. And we can't make those assumptions anymore because we know way too much, right? It has a lot to do with stress levels, sleep, genetics, where we live, what we have access to, all of these things that are often outside of a child's control. We need to remember that health comes in different sizes and looks different. We can't assume somebody's health by looking at them. And we also need to remember that shaming people and encouraging weight loss actually works against them and works against health overall. So the first thing you can do is kind of think about representation. So if you look around your class, is the artwork and imagery in your classroom celebrating people of various sizes? Hopefully you've thought about representation as it applies to race and gender and sexual orientation, all of those things. Sometimes people miss that body size part, right? So do your books and posters have a wide representation of bodies? Will the kids in your class see themselves represented in positive imagery? So if you have posters of people running or, gathering to eat a really beautiful meal at a table, are there people of different sizes doing those things? Are they going to see themselves? especially with activities, it's really hard to find people and pictures of people doing sports in larger bodies. And it's very easy to find people and kids in larger bodies being shamed in imagery. So are the fatter bodies in your classroom stuff exclusively used in an effort to shame them for specific behaviors? So oftentimes it's people kind of using a, people in a fatter body using a measuring tape to measure their stomach, or kind of looking, you'll see on the next slide, kind of looking between two types of foods, trying to decide. Being lazy on the couch with a remote control or those types of things. We often see that imagery uses people of certain body sizes versus a thin kid, right? So you'll find this when you do Google searches or you search for imagery. You're going to find, if you put in people doing something, people running, people eating, it's always going to come back with, images of thin people. Or you'll find images of thin people eating a salad and images of fat people eating a burger, right? So that all of these biases are tied into even our search algorithms. So just kind of being mindful about, even when you're making a PowerPoint or a presentation for a class, if you have diverse images. Similar to when you put in, if you search CEO on Google, it comes up with like lots of older, thin, white males. So you, just kind of turning that up on its head and thinking, do I want to let Google do this work for me, or do I want to search out kind of who actually could be represented here that is not? Just really functionally and situationally thinking about, is my classroom comfortable for kids of larger sizes? Is it set up so that there's like small areas they have to go through that is going to put them in situations where they have to kind of squeeze by somebody, and that is going to be a situation where that other person's going to, make fun of them, or, make any number of sounds or rude comments to them? Are the chairs connected to the desk? Do you have options within your budget and your school situation to change that so that everybody can feel comfortable sitting in the classroom? That's just a really basic one. This is important for teachers and administrators, leaving all personal diet talk at the door and enforcing that rule with fellow teachers and school staff. So I know it's really tempting to come in and share, a success story, or maybe you've had, some type of positive association with a specific diet. But we're going to talk in a little bit just about why diets in general and over the long term cause more harm than good. And so it's really important that teachers are not sharing personal information or personal experiences with specific diets with their students. We know that kids who diet are up to 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. And it's really hard for us as teachers or educators to know who might be at risk for those things. Furthermore, there really is no long-term evidence that any of these diets lead to reliable or sustainable weight loss, let alone improvements in nutrition or health. In fact, they are associated with long-term weight gain when we look at the independent research on diets. I'm not going to share this video in the interest of time, but I will put it in the notes. Essentially, what it shares with us is that dieting teaches kids to mistrust themselves and to not trust their own internal and hungerfulness. And it creates external, kind of teaches them to use external markers, which can deregulate and dysregulate their eating. And similar to drinking water or sleeping or breathing air, when we don't get enough of something we need, our body works really hard to catch up and to compensate in a way. And so that's why if somebody pulls an all-nighter, then they're probably falling asleep in your class the next day, right? Our body tries to regulate these things as best it can on its own. And the more we can do to help kids trust that process, the better. It's also why oftentimes kids who are confronted with or deal with food insecurity, not having enough food to eat as they're growing up, are more prone to binge eating later on and disordered eating. So people who saw a low fat label on food package actually consumed 50% more of that food in a sitting than people who didn't. Students that dieted were 12 times more likely to start binge eating than the peers that did not diet. And in this particular situation, high school girls who participated in an obesity prevention program wound up heavier than their peers who did not participate, even when taking into account starting BMI. So sometimes these dieting behaviors actually encourage some of what we're trying to avoid or protect them from. Even the American Academy for Pediatrics said way back in 2011, they started to come on board with this and say, the emphasis on dieting and weight loss among children and adolescents due to the obesity epidemic over the past decade may actually be contributing to the rising tide of eating disorders and obesity. So I do encourage you, if you go back through these slides, to watch that video, because the dietitian does a really great job of explaining how diets actually contribute to weight gain over time. And I know when I present to parents, the big question is, well, if we can't focus on weight loss and dieting or restricting their eating, what can we do? And so these are just a couple resources if you're interested. These are some great alternatives and models, frameworks for kind of talking about nutrition and eating in a way that is not restrictive and helps kids learn to trust themselves and their bodies.
And Kate, there was a question in the chat box that said, how about asking families about activity levels? Which I think is probably also in line with some of these resources that, you know, asking kids about how much they've moved is much more positive than.
Yeah, and that's great, as long as we're asking the thin kids too, because I think the other side of it is that we often miss health complications or opportunities to help with health improvement because we are so focused on weight that then thin kids who are not moving and not eating well, you know, miss out on some of those interventions. So yeah, great point. Oh, this is next, movement. So definitely movement is awesome. What we want to do is make sure that it is a reward and not a punishment or a compensation for eating. And so thinking about how are we talking about and viewing exercise in our classroom. We really don't want it to be the main motivator to be, you know, we do X and then we lose weight, right? The further we run, the more calories we burn. We want to kind of disconnect those things. If increasing, this is something we say to parents primarily, but remembering, this sort of goes to what I was just saying, if increasing physical activity is the goal, the individual child should not be the focus. So, you know, if we're working on it as a family, or for a child, somebody's worried that they're not getting enough physical activity, they're having anxiety about weight gain, we don't want to just say that kid needs to get more exercise. We want it to be, the family's going to try to choose a new park to go to every Saturday, right? And we're going to try to do this, or we're going to set some goals for climbing this hiking trail. And we really want to develop a lifelong love for movement and exercise and doing things that are social and not punitive, right? So it should really never be a punishment or bargaining tool for more food. Again, Gregory, I think you hit on this too. Normal body changes before and during puberty. This is a huge time we see people freak out, kids and parents alike. And often, you know, what happens is that normal things like girls who are storing up extra fat, you know, her body's preparing to go through her, you know, first period and really maturing, and it's storing up that fat. It's so anxiety producing for oftentimes the mom that they come in for an evaluation. And, you know, a lot of times it's found that this is just a normal body change that is preparing this person for a lot of cool things that are going to happen with their body, right? Or for boys, oftentimes, not always, but sometimes they're sprouting up really tall before they're filling out, right? And there's a lot of, you know, because the ideals for boys are often like, I need to be muscular and big, that makes them anxious. You know, they might be, have different insecurities about that. And so we want to just be able to normalize these changes ahead of time so that people know to expect these things. And that helps to go over this with parents as well. So we want to try to avoid like the scare tactics and the fear mongering. They're really popular right now. There's, you can find any number of these documentaries on Netflix, and they're very attention grabbing and compelling, and they make for a great, easy lesson. But I can't tell you how many people have come, how many, especially middle and high school people have come for treatment for an eating disorder that really was spurred by some of these really scary messages in some of these documentaries that are really extreme and shaming and just scary. And so kids, I like this quote from Jessica Setnick. She said, "They're pointless for kids who don't care and deadly for those who care too much." And so, just using caution as you are picking documentaries. Are they based in science? Do they consider both sides of something? Are they, playing into that weight stigma and diet industry fuel? This happens a lot with sugar and scaring people about sugar as well. So if you are going to incorporate those into your curriculum, consider incorporating alternative viewpoints as well. So these are a couple good documentaries. The Student Body is actually a student-created documentary that explores the issue of BMI in schools and kind of BMI report cards in schools, which we'll touch on as well. And then in the references, I also include a really wonderful article about the issue of sugar addiction and food addiction in general. So hopefully this is on your radar. I think it has been for most people with regard to other aspects of bullying, but we do see that being teased because of weight and size is really the most common reason kids are teased in school. They are not asking this question on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey anymore. The 2011 data is the last I could find, but I'm interested and would be pretty confident that it still remains one of the highest reasons. Another thing you can do in your classroom is have a policy against commenting on people's bodies. So not just bullying in its, typical form, like these negative things about somebody poking fun at somebody for packing on the pounds over summer break or something, but thinking about how often somebody says, even teachers walking into a room and seeing each other, like, "You look amazing, have you lost weight?" Thinking about, whether it's comes across as a positive or a negative comment, they're both reinforcing this bias towards larger bodies and establishing a focus on weight loss as some positive, right? So, I have found this to be really helpful in my family as well. The policy is just like, we just don't comment on other people's bodies like that, right? So then it goes both ways. It could be positive or negative. We might say, "You look really wonderful in yellow. That must be your color." Or, "You look super happy today. Like, you're full of energy." But we're not going to say, "Oh my gosh, you have like the perfect arms," or something like that, right? Or, "I love your abs. I wish I had abs like you." We're not going to say those things, right? And that can carry over to the classroom as well. So just being mindful about how often that is the topic of conversation in classroom. This is just something I share with parents, but I thought it would be helpful to share with you all as well, is that the American Academy of Pediatrics set in their recommendations most recently that they were recommending against pediatricians discussing weight with children. And we also recommend against parents having weight-related conversations with adolescents because it leads to more unhealthy behaviors, as opposed to focusing on wellness and movement and healthful eating. That bringing weight into the conversation very rarely makes things better and often does harm. Especially, this is an interesting tidbit, especially when it was dads who were talking about weight loss and diets. So given that pediatricians and parents we know can do harm by talking about weight, we can sort of apply that to teachers as well. So the 8th recommendation would be to review the evidence for any of the current interventions that you're doing in your classroom or your school with regard to weight or health or nutrition. So asking, is there research to back up this intervention? Is there long-term positive outcomes? Or does this have the potential to do more harm than good, right? So things like publicly weighing kids at school in a class setting, assigning things that require kids to count calories or, really closely track their food or alter their diets in significant ways. I haven't heard of this recently, but I've been in a couple of schools where they've announced over the loudspeaker who the staff winner was of their Biggest Loser competition. BMI report cards, I'm going to touch on in a moment. Assigning young kids to kind of go through their cabinets at home and label good and bad foods or healthy and unhealthy foods. We understand the kind of drive to do those things, but are they actually helping our kids be healthier, right? Our kids, my 7-year-old is not going to the grocery store and stocking that cabinet. So all that's doing is then kind of labeling those foods for her. And then when she has them, making it more likely that she's going to internalize herself as bad if she eats one of the foods that was on the bad side of that list, right? BMI report cards, I think, are falling off the wayside based on some of the data now. But for a while, schools were sending home these body report cards that actually were not shown when they finally did the research to even improve BMI. Even after 2 years, the kids who got them and had been screened in that way did not have positive outcomes or reduced BMIs. And the CDC echoed that little was known about them and no consensus exists on the utility of BMI screening for young people, and that there was actually indication that they could be doing more harm than good. Again, hence our title, Do No Harm. If we can't say that it helps and we know that it can harm, we need to reconsider, right?
And Kate, there were several questions about the use of BMI in the chat box. So would you like, in general, say that the BMI is probably a tool in school that we should and could avoid if possible?
Yeah, and I haven't gotten into it in this talk and I don't have a slide on it, but the BMI was really never meant to be an individual indicator of health. It's not a measure of an individual's health. It was actually developed by a mathematician and not a physician, and has some racist undertones in its development, but it was meant to measure population health or growth, not even health, but changes in bodies in an entire population of people, so countrywide. And we've kind of adapted it to this use that it's not really indicative of. And there are, I think it was 1989, they actually changed the ratings so that, overnight they changed the categories. So a ton more people were in the category of overweight and obese overnight, essentially. And we know that some of the people on that committee that chose to do that had ties and connections to the diet industry. So there's all sorts of kind of weird things about the BMI. I definitely discourage using it. Even when you do apply it to individuals, people like Serena Williams and George Clooney are in the obese category. And, Serena Williams, I would reckon to say that she is not an example of unhealthy. So kind of using that as a tool, I think at this point, we know enough that it is not helpful in general.
Thank you.
Yeah. Number 9 is probably the hardest one I'm going to give you in terms of recommendations, which is modeling. So this is the same slide I put up for parents, but no matter how you feel about your own body, we cannot shame ourselves in front of our students or kids, right? Unless we want them to feel the same way. And that takes practice and time, and sometimes you have to fake it until you make it, but it also goes back to kind of establishing those guidelines about what type of language you are going to allow in your classroom about bodies. And then 10 is to incorporate media literacy into your curriculums, no matter what you're teaching, no matter what age group you are, beginning to introduce really wonderful characters of all sorts of body shapes and sizes, and implementing assignments that help your students challenge the current thin ideal, appearance ideal, muscular ideal, whatever those ideals are, because they change. And discussing body size as a diversity issue, just as you would race or gender. So there's some really cool activities and assignments you can do, but essentially, thinking about what people are seeing in the media and reminding them that, you know, we get so used to seeing such a small representation of people, we get tricked into thinking everybody can and should have the same type of body. In reality, that is not what we see when we look around, but it's really hard to get out of that mindset when, you know, you're scrolling on social media or you're watching, you know, specific shows on TV. So giving them assignments that challenge those ideals is super important, because they are seeing many more mediated messages than we were at that age. And they're up against a lot, a lot tougher media messages. So it's only getting harder. These messages are evolving to kind of be more about what I can do with my body and what I can create, to what do I look like, and am I beautiful, or am I hot, or am I handsome, you know, whatever the it word is at that time. You can see kind of even within one brand how this has changed over decades, right? I'm gonna go through this fairly quickly because I think that you all have resources to find media literacy activities, but I do have a host of them. If you ever want to reach out, please do, that you can implement in your classrooms, and just making sure that you're covering social media literacy and commercial media literacy, because those are pretty separate things now. So kind of coming to the end here, thinking of these questions as a reflection. So, you know, am I teaching something to someone in a larger body? Would I make the same recommendation to a child in a smaller body, and vice versa? Because weight is not a behavior. That was like one of my favorite reminders. Weight is not a behavior. And so health focused behaviors are going to be the same across the board. Like we said, you know, we want to encourage joyful movement and activity for kids of all sizes and shapes, right? Am I assuming this child is healthy because they're thin, or not healthy because they're not thin? Is this something the child has control over? Or is this an issue that I could do a parent presentation for, or a parent workshop? How might different children interpret this differently? Does this have the potential to do harm? Do I have long-term evidence to show that this is helpful advice? Do I shame myself for what I brought for lunch, or whether I've exercised that day? Do I do that in front of the kids? And are my textbooks out of date? How do they talk about BMI? And do they moralize fat or food in ways that are going to be unhelpful for my students? And do I have body positive books in my classroom library? And just final thoughts, kids who feel good about their bodies, regardless of their weight, are more likely to engage in health behaviors. That's the big takeaway. So we want our messaging to focus on how these behaviors make us feel, and on developing gratitude for the function of our bodies as opposed to what they weigh or what they look like. And through this, we can help promote self-care and self-confidence, and develop kids that are less likely to struggle with eating disorders, more likely to have high self-esteem, and positive health outcomes overall. And lastly, children don't choose the shape or size of their bodies. When kids judge other kids, we call it bullying. When adults do it, we often call it health. When schools focus on appreciating bodies of all sizes, it takes the focus from weight to wellness, which is multifaceted. When all bodies are celebrated, kids can move their bodies and eat in ways that work best for them. So I am happy to, if people want to stay on, I know we got to the end there, but I'm happy to take more questions.
Kate, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation and very, very relevant to all the things that we do. There was a question that you hadn't addressed, and I was just going to read it. It was, is there research on weight stigmas and body positivity in the classroom for individuals with intellectual disabilities?
That is a great question, and I cannot answer that offhand. I don't know specifically, but I can definitely look into that and try to get back to you.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting question.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I think across the board, weight stigma has been shown to be harmful regardless of a number of different factors, but I don't know that they've looked at intellectual differences specifically. So that would be interesting to look at. Great question.
Kate, just
Yeah.
want It was a great presentation. And when we were going through the different slides and you were talking about thin and fat, two people came to my mind, Karen Carpenter and Barry White. Karen Carpenter was probably one of the greatest singers that ever was on this earth. And she suffered from an eating disorder, from anorexia nervosa. And Barry White contracted diabetes because he was so food deprived as a child. He thought that he wasn't going to be able to eat, and his comfort was to eat. I think if they had been privy to the information we have now, we'd probably still have both of them here. So I talk about that sometimes with kids to let them know that, hey, you're in a growing stage right now. Don't deprive yourself. Just make sure you exercise. Make sure you look at what, don't try to count calories and things like that, but just make sure it's quality as opposed to quantity. And we try to introduce them to different things like the Vietnamese diet. Very nutritious.
Yeah. I love the idea of kind of what can we incorporate and what can we try new instead of what can we take out and restrict, and kind of the focus on how we eat instead of what we eat all the time, or so specifically what we eat. So yeah, great.
I did with some of my students, and I said, we have a little contest. You can choose whatever you want from whatever menu you want, and then we look at the calories and the caloric nutritional value of what you're eating. And then a lot of them didn't realize, wow, if I put lime in my water, it alkalizes my water and helps me digest my food better. Or if I do certain things differently, I can eat this quantity of food without having the itis kick in, or finding out that turkey has this wonderful component that makes you sleepy. So, if you just say, hey, gotta eat less portion of turkey and something else, then you won't have that itis kick in. Just let them know it's okay to eat, but just know what you're eating, benefit from what you're eating, as opposed to depriving yourself, because we don't want you to miss out on a stage of development. We don't want your body to be nutritionally deficient. That's why you have rickets and people have, different things that come into play.
Thank you.
Love what you're doing, respect what you're doing. I'm glad to be a part of this group.
Thanks for coming.
Kate, do you have 5 more minutes in case anyone else has questions?
Yeah, definitely.
For those of you who are ready to go, I did put the certificate information in the chat box if you're interested in using this for professional development credit. And thank you, Kate. We'll officially close, but I appreciate you lingering. And thank you everyone for being here. So is there anyone that wanted to stay on and ask any other questions that maybe we didn't get to during the webinar?
If they come up later too, I'm happy to, if they trickle in, I'm happy to provide responses later.
And are we going to be sent a copy of this recording, or how does that work?
A copy of the recording will be posted on the website probably within a week. If you need it sooner, you can let Brian know.
Okay.
And you said something about the certificate. Where is that posted?
Let me see. I can repost it in the chat box here. There you go. There's a link in the chat box for your attendance certificate.
It should come right to your email.
All right. Well, if no one else has final questions or thoughts, I'll end the call. Thank you all so much for being here. And Kate, thank you so much for your presentation. We loved having you.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate everybody showing up for the topic. Bye, guys.
Bye.